I shouldn't have been here, really. Not at this hour, in a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. The hum of the air conditioner cutting through the quiet like a metronome I couldn't ignore. But there I was, sitting on the edge of the leather armchair in the back office of the hotel's small repair workshop, my fingers tapping against the notepad I hadn't opened, my mind somewhere entirely else. She was across the room, crouched by the counter, smoothing out a stack of invoices, her hair caught in that careless twist that made her look effortless and untouchable. I always noticed the small things. The way her ring caught the light. The way she leaned just slightly, as if she wasn't trying to be noticed, but somehow always was. "You're still here," she said, without looking up. Her voice had that rich, calm certainty that made you feel like the world could pause and nothing would crumble. I nodded, realizing my throat had gone dry. Words felt suddenly meaningless. I lost track of time," I said. Clumsy, awkward, the way I always got around her. She glanced at me then, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, the kind that made it impossible to tell whether she was amused or genuinely curious. There was a pause. One of those pauses that stretch, just long enough for the air between us to feel heavier. I could hear the quiet of the room more clearly, the soft squeak of her shoes on the linoleum, the gentle hum of the light above, even the slow tick of the wall clock. Then she looked at me properly, fully, and for a moment it felt like she had seen straight through every pretense I carried. Not a judgment, exactly, but recognition. Like she knew how badly I wanted to say something, anything, without actually saying it. I swallowed. She returned to her papers, and I felt that tug, like I was being gently pulled into something I wasn't ready to name. At some point, I must have shifted, because her gaze caught mine again. She raised an eyebrow, just slightly, and then, quietly, almost under her breath, she said something that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. "Don't pretend you're not paying attention." It wasn't pointed, not exactly. And she didn't smile this time. Just let the words hover in the air between us, like a feather suspended before it falls. My chest tightened without warning. My hands stilled. And though the words were playful, maybe teasing, there was a weight to them I couldn't shake. I wanted to answer. I wanted to step closer. But I didn't. I could only nod once, foolishly, as if that would carry any meaning. She turned away, back to her stack of invoices, completely composed again, and yet, something had shifted. I couldn't stop feeling it. Later, after she left the room for a moment, I found myself staring at the chair where she had been, wondering if the air still held a trace of her presence. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, subtle and warm, and I realized with a kind of sharp, quiet ache that I had already started counting the seconds until she'd return. And then I remembered the last thing she had said, that teasing, quiet whisper, and I couldn't stop thinking about the weight behind it. The way she knew, somehow, exactly what she was doing. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew I wouldn't forget it. Not tonight. Not ever. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. The repair shop smelled different this time, more like motor oil and damp rags, less like the clean, ordered office upstairs. She was there, crouched over a broken lamp on the counter, her blouse slightly rumpled at the shoulders, sleeves rolled up. I'd been sent to help her lift it, but somehow, standing there beside her, it felt like I was intruding on a private world. "Careful," she murmured, not looking at me. Her voice was soft, but not soft enough to mask the tension in her shoulders. She shifted the lamp just enough that I could see a faint line of worry crease her forehead. For a moment, I caught myself staring at the delicate movements of her hands, long, precise fingers that handled the fragile wiring as if the lamp were a living thing. "I've got it," I said too quickly, my hands hovering over hers. She glanced at me, and I almost stumbled back at the intensity of her gaze. Not cold exactly, but measured, like she was testing the air between us before deciding if it was safe. She laughed quietly, almost under her breath, a sound that made my stomach tighten. "You're overthinking it," she said, finally letting me take the lamp. But I could see the small exhale she couldn't hide, the one that said she'd been holding tension in her shoulders for too long. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap, but my words stuck. Instead, I found myself just watching, noticing how her hair fell in front of her face when she leaned forward, how she absent-mindedly brushed it aside with the back of her hand, and the faint shadow under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She wasn't complaining. She didn't need to. I could feel it anyway. "Thanks," she muttered after a moment, and it caught me off guard. Not for the gratitude itself, but because it sounded small, private, like she was letting me in just a fraction. I nodded, unsure how to respond, and we moved around the counter in silence, coordinating without words. At one point, she paused, glancing toward the window, and I noticed the faint tremble in her fingers. Something unspoken lingered there, a hesitation, maybe a memory, maybe just exhaustion. I didn't press. I just let her move, giving her the space she seemed to need, even as the tension between us hummed quietly, like electricity just beneath the surface. When the lamp was finally steady, she leaned back, brushing her hair behind her ear. I saw a flicker of something I couldn't name, relief, vulnerability, maybe curiosity, and it made my chest tighten in a way that was entirely unwelcome and entirely welcome at the same time. Then she looked at me, and our eyes held longer than they should have. Not a word was said, but in that quiet, charged pause, I could feel the gentle pull of something I wasn't supposed to name, and I realized I would be thinking about it long after the lamp was fixed. Her lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, before she turned back to her work. I swallowed hard, and even as she focused again, I couldn't stop feeling the weight of that brief, impossible moment between us. The rain tapped against the tall windows in slow, uneven rhythms, like it had its own impatient heartbeat. The repair shop was empty except for us, the overhead lights casting long, quiet shadows across the tools and scattered papers. She was sitting on the edge of the counter, leaning forward slightly, her hands folded loosely in her lap. I was close enough to see the faint tremor in her fingers, but far enough to pretend I wasn't noticing. "You always work this late?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice was heavier than intended. She looked up, and for a moment, the usual composure faltered. "Sometimes," she said softly. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she shifted, and our knees brushed. A small spark jolted through me, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of every inch between you, and I froze, pretending to examine the screwdriver in my hand. The storm outside pressed against the windows, and the room seemed smaller, warmer, more intimate. I wanted to say something, anything that might let her know I noticed the tension, the hesitation in her eyes. But words felt impossible. She glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone, or hoping no one would come, and I realized how fragile this quiet moment was. Then my phone buzzed. I hadn't even heard it ring before. She gave a faint exhale and muttered, "Ignore that," though her expression tightened just a fraction. My curiosity gnawed at me, but I obeyed. Whoever, or whatever, it was didn't matter right now. What mattered was the small heat in her gaze, the way she hadn't pulled away, even when our proximity was suddenly impossible to ignore. "I should probably," she started, and stopped, her voice trailing off. She looked down at her hands, brushing a loose strand of hair back, the hesitation lingering like smoke in the air. Something hovered there, unspoken, delicate, and I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to reach for her hand, to anchor myself in that small, charged moment. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was acutely aware of the distance between us, the unspoken rules that kept us from saying too much, doing too much. She leaned back, and I noticed how tired she looked, the way her shoulders sagged just slightly, like she'd been holding herself up longer than necessary. My hand itched to brush a stray hair from her face, to steady the tension in the room, but I stayed frozen, silent, watching. The storm's rhythm shifted, a sharp tap of rain against glass, and she glanced at me again. There was something in her eyes, something private, something she almost said but didn't. My lips parted slightly, and I thought of closing the distance between us, even just a fraction, but before I could, she shifted again, clearing her throat. "Coffee?" she asked, suddenly casual, as if the storm, the tension, the spark between us hadn't existed. I nodded, my pulse still a little too loud in my ears. And even as I reached for the mug, I couldn't shake the memory of that near contact, the brush of knees, the almost whisper of something unspoken. I would think about it later, long after the coffee had gone cold, and long after she had smiled that faint, unreadable smile and looked away. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and coffee, the kind that clung to your clothes and your hair after a long day. She was sitting cross-legged on the worn leather couch, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street below. I hadn't moved from the doorway, suddenly aware that even my shadow felt intrusive. "I don't know why I keep doing this," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the quiet. I realized she wasn't talking to me yet. She was speaking into the space between us, as if trying to measure it, define it, hold it at bay. I stepped closer, but not too close. Every instinct told me to bridge the distance, to offer words that might make this lighter, easier. But I stayed still, noticing the way her fingers twitched against her knee, the small, unintentional bite of her lip. She looked tired, worn in a way that had nothing to do with the hours she worked. "What?" I asked softly, my voice barely breaking the silence. She didn't answer immediately. She turned her gaze toward me then, and the room shifted. The faint lines around her eyes, the slight sag in her shoulders, the small tension at the corner of her mouth. All of it suddenly felt like an invitation and a warning at the same time. "I mean, what are we doing?" she said finally, almost whispering, almost questioning herself as much as me. Her hands curled in her lap, tightening for a second before she let them fall again. I swallowed. The question felt like a weight pressing against my chest. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make it lighter, but there was nothing. So I just let my eyes search hers, letting the silence speak for me instead. She laughed once, dryly, a sound that didn't reach her eyes. "We can't pretend this is normal anymore," she said, voice trembling just slightly, and I felt my stomach knot. Normal. Yes, that was exactly the lie we'd been holding on to, the thing we couldn't admit we were breaking. I could feel the tension vibrating in the space between us, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. And yet, we didn't move. We didn't reach out. We just stared, measuring the distance that felt suddenly unbearable, knowing that something had changed. "I shouldn't even be here," she said, almost to herself, almost trying to convince herself. But the way she looked at me, like she wanted to be here, like she wanted to say more, made me realize that neither of us could escape this quiet, heavy truth. Her voice faltered. Her eyes glistened in the dim light, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure, a small, human vulnerability that was impossible to ignore. I wanted to close the distance, to soothe it, to fix it, but I didn't. I couldn't. The room fell silent again. The rain outside was sharper now, louder, echoing against the glass. She didn't look away, and neither did I. "I'm scared," she said finally, the words so fragile I felt like they could shatter if I moved too fast. And then she let her head fall into her hands, the vulnerability raw and unguarded, leaving me with a weight I didn't know how to carry, but knew I wouldn't forget. I hadn't expected to see her pause like that, mid-step, with a letter clutched loosely in her hand. The air between us shifted without warning, heavier, like the room had inhaled sharply and forgotten to exhale. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the envelope as if it might speak for her. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, a delicate mixture of guilt and longing. I nodded slowly, unsure what she meant, unsure if she wanted an answer or simply needed to hear her own voice. "It's nothing you need to know," she said, twisting the paper in her hands. "Just old mistakes. People I let slip away. Things I said I'd never forget, but did." I could see her fingers tightening around the envelope, her knuckles pale against the paper. And then, in a soft, almost inaudible exhale, she let it fall onto the counter. I bent down, picking it up carefully, my pulse quickening. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar, but the words inside, they weren't meant for me. They were raw, confessional, written to someone she had loved and lost long before I knew her. And yet, as I read the first few lines silently to myself, I realized it wasn't just nostalgia. It was heartbreak she hadn't fully unpacked, grief she carried quietly in the spaces between her smiles, her composure, her laughter. She watched me without a word, her expression unreadable but vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. I shouldn't have left him like that, she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. I thought I was protecting him, but I just walked away. I ruined it. I felt the words sink in, heavy, pulling at something fragile inside me. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words didn't exist. So I just handed the letter back, letting her take it slowly, reverently, as if it weighed as much as the unspoken truths in her heart. You remember people like that, don't you? She asked, her gaze catching mine now. Even when they're gone. I nodded. I did. The thought of it pressed down on my chest in a way that was hard to name. We shared a long silence, one that didn't need filling. It was a silence of understanding, of recognition, and of the subtle ache of regret that lingered in her eyes. She tucked the envelope into her bag, fingers brushing against mine in the process. A fleeting touch that was nothing and everything all at once. I felt the jolt immediately, the reminder that some connections couldn't be explained, only felt. Sometimes, she said softly, almost to herself, I wonder if I'd do it differently, if I'd stay. I watched her fold her hands over the bag, her shoulders slumping slightly, and I realized that the weight she carried wasn't just about the past. It was about now, about the quiet moments, the almost decisions, the spaces where life felt too heavy to navigate alone. And for a second, maybe a heartbeat, the room felt suspended. Her vulnerability, the old heartbreak, my awareness of it all, like a soft tremor beneath the surface of everything we were pretending didn't exist. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I only let the silence stretch, knowing I would carry this moment with me long after the lamp was off, long after the lights went out, long after she left. We were quiet that evening, the room dim except for the soft yellow lights spilling from the desk lamp. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to our tiny, suspended world. She sat cross-legged on the couch, the envelope from before now tucked safely beside her, as if putting it away made the past lighter. I perched on the edge of the chair, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, but careful not to intrude. Funny, she said, almost to herself, how the smallest moments can feel the heaviest. Her voice was soft, measured, but it carried everything she hadn't said in the last few days. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. I just watched, noticing the way her fingers rested against her knees, the subtle tilt of her head, the faint shimmer in her eyes. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was intentional, a shared understanding that words weren't enough. Yet in that quiet, there was more honesty than anything we could have forced out in conversation. I felt it in the way she exhaled slowly, how her shoulders eased their tension, and how her gaze occasionally flicked to mine, as if checking for permission to simply be. I don't think I can keep pretending anymore, she murmured, almost afraid to look at me directly. It's different now. Yes, I said softly. It is. And that was all we needed. No grand declarations, no explanations. Just acknowledgement. Her laugh, low and hesitant, escaped at some point, the kind of laugh that carries relief and nervousness all at once. I smiled quietly, aware that we had both crossed some invisible threshold, one that made everything afterward inevitable, though still fragile. I shifted slightly, just enough for my knee to brush hers. She didn't move away. Instead, her hand found mine, briefly, like a question and an answer at the same time. I didn't grip it, I didn't force it. I simply held it, letting the warmth speak what neither of us could yet say aloud. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Time felt suspended, the world outside fading. We settled into a rhythm of shared stillness, each of us aware of the other in the quietest, most profound way. No words were necessary. No promises had to be made. She leaned back, finally, letting the tension drain from her body. I leaned just slightly too, our foreheads nearly touching before we pulled away, both smiling faintly at the intimacy of the gesture. The moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, human, earned, and somehow more important for it. The envelope, the letter, the long nights, the rain, the pauses, the silences, all of it had led here. To this subtle collapse into something neither of us dared name, but both of us recognized. And as she let her hand rest on mine again, softly, without force, without urgency, I realized that nothing about this was rushed. Nothing about this had been easy, but it was ours. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. We just existed in that shared space, breathing, aware, and quietly, irrevocably connected. The city moved on outside, and we stayed, suspended in the gentle inevitability of it all. It's been months since that night, the one where everything shifted without either of us saying a word. Sometimes I still catch myself remembering the way the city sounded outside that dimly lit room, the faint hum of the lamp, the subtle warmth of her hand brushing against mine. Small things, meaningless on their own, but monumental in how they changed everything. I've noticed the way I carry myself now, slower, more aware, more careful with what I say and what I leave unsaid. She moves differently too, I think, though she would never admit it. There's a gentleness in her gaze that wasn't there before, a softness that balances the quiet strength she's always carried. We've learned, in the smallest of gestures, that connection isn't always about grand declarations or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it's just being present, just holding space for someone without trying to fix the impossible. I've thought a lot about what we both gave up before, the past heartbreaks and regrets tucked into letters and memories. Those moments didn't vanish. They shaped us, but now they exist alongside this new understanding, like layers of light and shadow. I know I don't want to go back, and I know she doesn't either. What we have is fragile, yes, but earned. And fragile feels infinitely better than absent. There's still tension, still curiosity, still those unspoken moments that make my chest tighten in ways I never expected. But the difference now is that we can sit with it, without fear or shame, without pretending it isn't there. We can laugh, tease, and linger in silence together, and somehow, it all feels safe. I think that's what love really is, at least for us. Not fireworks or cliches, not rushed words or easy comfort, but quiet understanding, shared vulnerability, the ability to meet someone halfway without losing yourself or each other. And in that sense, we've both changed. I carry less fear. She carries less pretense. And somehow, just by being who we are, we've built something that feels real. Sometimes I glance back, almost involuntarily, to the moments that brought us here. The letter, the storm, the pauses, the almost confessions, and I smile. Because it wasn't perfect. It was messy, human, painfully slow at times. But it was ours, and that matters more than anything. I don't know what the future holds. But I do know this. I wouldn't trade any of those small, stolen seconds for anything. Not for certainty, not for clarity, not for ease. They were worth it. And maybe that's the thing about connection. It doesn't need an announcement. It only needs recognition, patience, and the courage to stay, even when it's difficult. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this? Because sometimes, the quietest moments leave the loudest echoes.